Okay, it's time to start. Yeah, welcome everyone for the. Actually, it's a CALOP seminar, but I also announced it to our department as well. So it's a great honor to introduce Michael Pinedo, to all the participants today. Actually, he is my advisor when I was a postdoc at NYU. So it's quite long time ago. So, and after that, I'm still working with Professor Michael Pinedo, and we published more than 20 papers. Yeah, and we are still working together. And yeah, he first visited Korea this time. He had a seminar at SNU and KAIST, and then finally he arrived at the best school. I'm very happy to be here, and so he will present one coming papers, published in Israel, right? Yeah. So please welcome with warm hands.
It's a great pleasure to be here. This is the result of a long collaboration with Kambok and his PhD students. And both Kambok and I are interested in scheduling. What I wanted to talk about today, I don't have to use the mic, do I? You can hear me, okay. There was a paper that's written that's appeared 2 months ago in European Journal of Operational Research, and that journal had its 50th anniversary, and based on that 50th anniversary, they asked a whole bunch of people to write 50-year histories on various topics. So also on the topic of scheduling, they want us to write in 20 pages the history, 50 years history of scheduling. And the people they asked are these 4 people. Let me tell you a little bit of description of these guys, because maybe you get to know them, and maybe they come here to Korea. The first one is Alessandro Agnetis. He is at the University of Siena. He's a senior guy, and he wrote a book actually on multi-agent scheduling. Whatever. Well, by the way, that book, you think multi-agent scheduling is a very specialized topic. It's not so specialized. It occurs a lot. One of the main occurrences of multi-agent scheduling is where it's a big headache. It is at an airport where the resources of an airport are the runways. Those are like machines in a factory. These are the runways. And a takeoff and a takeoff or a landing is a job that you have to do that on the runway. Let a plane take off, and then the next plane can take off, and we know exactly how much time a takeoff and a landing can take. And but we have to serve a number of airlines that have to share that runway. And those runways, the different airlines are different agents, and each one of the airlines have their objective functions. The objective functions of airlines are actually quite interesting because they want a lot of on-time arrivals, because there is a very precise definition of an on-time arrival, because those are the statistics that are being published worldwide. Listen, what is the percentage of on-time arrivals of this airline? You want it to be high, just like the number of luggage lost. You know, airlines have a lot of statistics we have to worry about. So that's multi-agent scheduling. And this guy, the Italian guy, he is actually the expert in that. Let me tell you, this is a French guy, the second one. And he wrote a book on multi-criteria scheduling. And I can tell you already right now, multi-criteria scheduling, every application in practice is multiple objectives. Every application, it doesn't exist in practice a single objective scheduling problem. Even you in your daily life, when you do your scheduling of your activities on your daily basis, you are solving a multi-criteria scheduling problem, but it sort of goes automatically, and you know what the trade-offs is. Do you have to do this first or that? And there are advantages and disadvantages. Multi-criteria scheduling is something that you have to do on a daily basis. The French, so that's this guy here, seems to be the expert in that field. And there is a book that already appeared in the second edition that the French have written. They have a different style than my writing. They're very close friends of mine, but we think differently. But actually, I recommend you to look at the book. And I'm pretty sure that from Springer you can get a free electronic copy of that book. Actually, now I want to tell you the experts in multi-criteria scheduling are not Jean-Charles Bilot and the other guy, his name is Vincent Kind. It is a girl in Zhengzhou, at Zhengzhou University in mainland China. She knows the most about multi-criteria scheduling. So if by chance, when I mentioned a couple of problems, and you want to work on those problems, make sure that you contact her first, because she, and by the way, she has tough competition. The French are not so tough. Those you may be able to beat. But that lady in Zhengzhou, that's not a picnic. That's real work. You really have to be good to work with her. She is actually, her name is Ruby Chen. Okay, that is I have also written a book in scaling. Maybe you have seen it. Springer is fairly happy with the book. I think they're making some money on the book. I hope so. And then the last guy is an Israeli guy, Dvir Shabtai, and he has different interests. He writes papers. He has a certificate on scaling with rejection. What is scaling with rejection? Suppose you are a factory and you have orders coming in, and you have to scale those orders. But at a certain moment you say, hey, listen, if I accept all the orders, then I provide bad service and I cannot meet deadlines. So then my objective function will be very bad. So maybe I should not accept all my orders. So I have to tell some of my clients, sorry, you have to go somewhere else. Okay, that's scheduling with rejection. It's very common in practice. So scaling with rejection, he is an expert on that. He is also an expert on something what we call scaling with controllable processing times. What are controllable processing times? Controllable processing times, suppose you put a skyscraper in Seoul. You know, that's a project that has 10,000 activity, 10,000 jobs. There are precedence constraints. And you have to meet it, you have to deliver it to people, that skyscraper, by a certain date 5 years from now. If you don't deliver it by that date, then because of the contract, you have to start paying a monthly penalty. By the way, those penalties are not a picnic. I know the penalties in New York. If you don't deliver a building according to the contract on time, you have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. Okay, so what does that mean? At a certain moment, if you know that your project doesn't meet the deadline, you have to speed up. You have to speed up the scale. What does speeding up the scale means? It means some people have to work overtime, or you have to hire more people, and that means extra cost. So just for meeting the deadline and not having to pay the penalty, you're controlling the process again, basically speeding up the process, speeding up all the activities, and pay the extra money. So you have to find out what that trade-off is. That trade-off, that's scaling and controllable processing. And by the way, that's a multi-criteria scaling problem also, because you're trading off the extra cost of speeding up the processing versus not having to pay the penalties. So those are important problems. I can tell you in the construction industry, people are very worried about that in every country. Okay. Actually works. Yeah, it works. Okay. Okay. Now, why is it so scaling problems concern the best way of allocating resources? And very often in this talk, we're going to call a resource a machine. By the way, when we say a machine, it's a very abstract concept because it could be the runway at the airport. That's equivalent, mathematically equivalent to a machine. And a resource could also be a person. And who do you assign a particular task? Okay, that person could be also a machine. And why is it difficult to write a 20-page comprehensive work of 50 years of scaling research? It's not, writing this paper was not actually a picnic, because you have to decide what are you going to put in it and what are you not going to put in it. And so here are some of the reasons But there is a very large set of scattered heterogeneous problems and models in scaling. And basically in every industry there are scaling problems. One of the industries I can tell you already, I was talking about project scaling a skyscraper. You have to build a skyscraper in Seoul. There are scaling concerns. Suppose you have to develop a software system. You work for a consulting company. That's actually much more interesting than a skyscraper. The reason why a software system is so much more interesting to develop that, because the time it takes to develop code, the time it takes is not predictable. You don't have good distributions for it. And well, let's not talk about having ChatGPT developing code, but suppose in the past, just to ask you a question, if SAP, you all know what SAP is, the German software development company, if they have to decide, hey, listen, they are going to develop a software system and they estimate that the system is going to be 100,000 lines of code, 100,000 lines of code, how many programmers do they have to assign to that? Because they have to finish it in, let's say, 3 years. 100,000 lines of code, a programmer, how many lines, so they have to compute how many programmers they need. How many lines of code can a programmer write per day? What does SAP compute? How many lines of code is that?
5 lines.
Huh?
5.
Higher than that. It's around 10. 10 lines of code. 1 line per hour. So 1 line per hour. That means actually, basically, why is it so low? On that basis, you're going to compute the number of programmers, because how often do you have to rewrite it? And how often do you have to throw that line of code away and rewrite it? So basically, if you have to compute the number of programmers, count on it that a programmer cannot develop towards the final 100,000 lines of code. He can develop 10 lines per day. That's it. And now you can compute the number of programmers. By the way, that's the way they do it. Microsoft, SAP, they all have their own ways of computing. And the productivity is fascinating. And by the way, the distributions of the amounts of time, especially in software development, not so much in construction. In construction, very often you have to deal with normal distribution. In software development, you have to deal with what we call extreme value distributions. So that are distributions with a heavy tail. And those are the largest, the most difficult to predict, because now it is, all the processing times have a very large variance. And that's actually quite fascinating. Okay, so we have scaling in many application environments. And when specific issues may produce a virtually infinite number of models. By the way, that for academics, that is very nice, because now we can write many papers and everybody can get tenure. So we have sort of something like paper multiplication, which is actually, okay, that's true. The scaling may have different meanings depending on the application context and the decision goals. For an HR manager, assigning people to tasks. For a production manager, allocate production orders to capacity across various days in the factory. I was telling already many people, scaling the next industry. By the way, we were talking today historically, where did scaling start? Scaling started approximately 120, 130 years ago in the steel industry. In the steel industry, both in the United States and in Europe. That's where people like Gant and some Polish guy that's actually fairly famous in Europe, his name was Adamiecki, they started working on scaling problems in the steel industry. And by the way, both of them were very experienced industrial engineers. You can read their life stories. You can read their life stories on Wikipedia. And they published papers also, 120. Gant published a book. Okay, so it started in the steel industry, and at that time, scaling was important for the steel industry, for the whole economy. The steel was so important for the whole economy. Now, if you are interested in scaling in healthcare, I can tell you the American situation. Healthcare in the United States is 20% of the American GDP. 20% of the American GDP is a large amount. Here, the Koreans are a little bit more healthy than Americans. By the way, there is even very interesting comparison between the health characteristics of Koreans versus Americans, and I can tell you details later on. But I can assure you that if you look at the healthcare here in Korea, 10% of the GDP for sure. I know already from mainland China, it was 8%, and it's getting now to 10%. And now healthcare, the productivity of healthcare, and you're talking about surgery scheduling, appointment scheduling, how do you schedule surgeries? The productivity of healthcare is based on two areas of knowledge. One of it is scheduling. How do you schedule your operations and your surgeries and all that type of stuff? Appointment scheduling. And the other thing is queuing. How do you handle queues? That's important. And if you don't have those two bases of knowledge, you cannot improve the productivity in healthcare. Productivity in healthcare that will be very, very important for any economy, also the Korean economy. I can guarantee you that. It would be nice. You know, the funny thing is, I asked actually this question already a couple of people in the last couple of days. What percentage of the Korean GDP is healthcare? I didn't get the answer yet. Apparently, it's not. You have checked on ChatGPT. By the way, I think that maybe you get an answer. I'm not quite sure if I will believe the answer, or how they compute the answer, how they measure it, but you can get some answer. Okay. Think about a logistic manager, coordinate vehicles with deliveries. By the way, a vehicle routing problem, that's you work on it. Vehicle routing problem, it is, we consider it one of the important scheduling problems. Why is it an important scheduling problem? Basically, the vehicles are the machines. And then you have to decide which, and basically for each machine, you have to compute the traveling salesman problem. By the way, the traveling salesman problem, probably all of you have heard of it. That's a scheduling problem. It's basically a single machine with sequence-dependent setup times. And it's a very classical problem. So there are many people that have spent their whole life just looking at the traveling salesman problem. Very, very bright people. We had one in my department. His name was Manfred Patberg. Patberg was a fairly interesting guy. And very bright guy. Vehicle routing problems are part of, and I'm going to tell you maybe later what is the special part of vehicle routing and scheduling. Okay, well, a single unified framework for scheduling in general, there have been some unified frameworks in the past, but it has been very difficult to make one because we have different classes of scheduling problems. So let me tell you already some of the different classes. Well, we are going to talk now in the next hour mainly about machine scheduling. Machine scheduling machine is some general concept. It could be a runway, it could be an operating room in a hospital, that's also a machine, and it could be a human being. We can have project scheduling. Remember what project scheduling is? It is putting the skyscraper in, building the skyscraper in Seoul, okay, or building a computer system. You know, Microsoft, whenever they had the next version of their operating system, and you're talking very often about 500,000 lines of code. They had a very interesting rule. The person, the VP in charge of that development of the next version, they have it that after 2 years of work, even the project was not complete yet, they take the guy out and tell him that he has to go fishing for a year on company expense, and company pays his salary, but he is not allowed to come to the office. What was the reason? Because with the previous versions of the operating system, the general manager in charge of the development, they get a heart attack. That's actually very common. The person of such a large system, development of such a large system, they get a heart attack. That's a problem. That's a problem, and then because the guy, they have to take him out, etc., has to go to the hospital, and maybe the guy even passes away. So before he gets a heart attack, you have to take him out and send him to, and you can do that in the state of Washington. You send him to go fishing for a year. And no, this is historical. They'll go fishing because you want to make sure that he doesn't get a heart attack. Okay, so that's project scheduling. especially in software development. Project scheduling is fascinating. And I'm pretty sure that there will be, how do you manage projects and scheduling in software development? Let me talk a little bit about timetabling, because there's certain people that are really experts in timetabling. Timetabling, the main application of timetabling, the classical application of timetabling, I can tell you what it is. It's universities. Why? Because universities have class schedules and you have to schedule the classes, put them all in slots in such a way, because of each type of class, you know what the group of students is that have to take that class. And now you have to, of course, the group of students, you have to balance it that they can take combinations of certain classes because they're all in their second year or whatever, things like that. So you have to build a timetable of classes in such a way that it's as convenient as possible for the students. Because if it's not convenient, you'll hear about it. So you want to make it, for sure. And by the way, to make the objective, how to make it convenient, and the timetabling of classes is very interesting. There's some people that are actually, they are in Canada. And Canada, and also some British people that are expert, I'm not quite sure how, they are experts in timetabling of classes. By the way, the timetable, and you think that exam scheduling, so at the end of the semester you have to give the students exams. So you have to schedule the exams, all of them have to be in 1 week. And how are you going to schedule them in such a way that the objective functions are very, very interesting, that the timetable of the exams have to satisfy. Because how is the rule with our university is, if a student, according to his schedule, has to take 3 exams on 1 day, he is allowed to go to one of the professors and tell him, "Sir, I have 3 exams. I have to reschedule, I have to get a special day for your exam." And of course, you're going to tell him, "No, sorry, okay, why don't you go to one of the other 2 guys?" What is the rule here? If you do an exam schedule, and a student has to take 3 exams on the same day, he has to take it. You are no comment. Yes?
You have to take it.
They have to take it.
Yeah.
Oh boy, I have to tell that to our people because with us they have the right to complain. You have the right to complain.
Even 5.
And that's why actually it is fairly the exam scheduling problem. So there are people that are, believe it or not, there are people specialized on exam scheduling. And it's actually quite interesting. It's quite funny also if you read the papers. We're not going to get into it. Let me tell you a much bigger field, because the timetabling of schools, of universities, and exam scheduling, so class scheduling, exam scheduling, there are a bunch of people. I told you already, mainly Canadians and Brits. They have an industry that they write papers there. All of them got tenure. Very, very, very nice. Let me tell you about tournament scheduling. That is fascinating. And how much money is involved in tournament scheduling. I can tell you, for example, in soccer, there is, of course, on each one of these topics, at least 1 book has been written. Each one of them, at least 1 book. So, of course, tournament scheduling, there is a book written on tournament scheduling. And you can already imagine what the nationality is of the person who wrote the book on tournament scheduling. What?
Not United States.
No.
England,
What?
UK.
No. Brazilian. It's a very smart guy from here. His name is Celso Ribeiro. You can get his CV. Looks very. So, well, you know the Brazilians, they have the pretense, they think they know something about soccer. Okay? Whenever we hear that in Holland, we think, oh, okay, something about soccer. It's not really a big deal. They don't know that much. So now, what do you know about, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Korean Soccer League is similar, but maybe it's not, and then you tell me if it's not similar. What is a tournament? We have a league, let's say 20 clubs, and each club has to, this coming year, has to play each other club twice. Once at its own location and once at the other location. Okay? So we have to schedule that. So each club has a 20, so there are 20 clubs, or let's say there are 21 clubs, so he has to 20, so 40 games. 40 games. Then, the 40 games, you want, because of the fans of, let's say, for example, here in Pohang Steelers or whatever it's, okay? So, we make a distinction what we call home games and away games. So if the team is this week at home or if he is away. Now for the fans, you want each club to play this week at home and then next week away and then back at home, etc. So we have a pattern that we call in tournament scale home, away, home, away, home, away. Then we have, because by the way, there is tournament scheduling is very, very closely related to graph theory. By the way, it's very, very, there are some Koreans that have worked on tournament scheduling. So you have to have that alternating home-away pattern. The moment you deviate from that pattern, so you have home, away, away, home, away, home, away. So you have two aways consecutively. That we call a break. So, or we have two homes consecutively. So if you have home, away, home, home, and then again away, home, away, we call that a break. By the way, that's a mathematical term. So if you read away, what is the scale? What is the objective in tournament scheduling? You want to minimize the breaks. By the way, there is the theorems that are written about that are very. I don't think the ChatGPT will be able to do it. Okay, but you can imagine already. There is, just to tell you how much money is involved. I'm not quite sure if that money is involved here in Korea also. By the way, I heard about the Germans are also very active in it. It's not only the Brazilians. The Germans also think they know something about soccer. But okay, it's really funny people, okay? And because also what is the tournament scale you have to predict the year in advance, the coming year, what are the two clubs that have the highest chance of winning the league? Okay? We would like to predict it in advance. Because the best, nicest schedule is, by the way, and now you have to, who are you going to predict? You are seeing which players they buy, etc. So you say this club has a very, very good chance of being the leader. You want the two that have the highest chance of winning the league to play against each other in the last week of the league, because that's the best for the schedule. You know, the television stations will love that, because suppose both of them have the same number of points, and they have to, that's ideal. That's ideal. So people do a lot of reading. So actually, if you come up with a schedule in the United States or in Brazil I know for sure, and you give it to the Football League, and they approve it, by the way, they only can approve it after also the television stations have looked at it. They have to measure eyeballs. They say, hey, listen, okay. So it's not just the clubs have to look at it, also the television stations. They approve it. The price, you can charge $1 million. By the way, that's worth it, huh? $1 million. But by the way, for you to come up with that schedule and have really, because you have to convince the clubs and you have to convince television stations, you're working a whole year, full-time, very hard. And then you come up with you probably come up with 3-4 different schedules. And there is a lot of mathematics there. And then if they take one, if you're talking about $1 million, you can give them a bill. Well, they should pay $1 million. By the way, you probably cannot do that research on your own. You probably need at least 3-4 PhD students to do a lot of it. But you can imagine, just to tell you a little bit what tournament scheduling, but if that Brazilian guy, he's a very, very nice guy, he likes soccer. There was even something else in Brazil that was very funny. Brazil is a large country. You don't have that problem here in Korea. But the United States has that problem also in baseball, that you don't want the clubs to have to travel too much consecutively. So you want to minimize their travel time. minimize their travel time and not too much travel concentrated in a very short period. So that goes part in the scale, that you don't want it because that would be too hard for the players. So to do that, so you have to minimize the traveling salesman problem in part of the scaling problem. So this Celso Ribeiro, who wrote that book, he had a fantastic system. The guy is very bright. He got his PhD somewhere in England. I don't know where he got his PhD. But if you get the chance of listening to him, it's worth listening to him. So he had a fantastic system, and it's really very convenient for all the players. And then he finds out that the Brazilian Football League does not take his scale. What happened? What happened? Because also that minimizing the travel time and all that was beautifully done in there. Then he found out that the people who had to approve the scale, that was the president of the Brazilian Football League, he was the owner of the travel agency that, that the players had to use to book their trips. And he didn't want to minimize the traveling salary. He wanted to maximize the traveling salary. So there was a difference in opinion. By the way, this is historic. This is historic. So that was, tournament scheduling. By the way, also in Brazil, in Germany, very funny things happened. And because people, the funny things is how much people have to work to get a good schedule, and then the way people have screwed up in the past. It's because very often where the Germans have screwed up, whenever they make a prediction, because I told you already, you want to know in advance when you make the schedule, which clubs are going to be the dominating clubs the coming year, because those you want to have them play. You know, you don't want it already to be decided who is going to win 10 weeks before the end of the league. That would be a disaster, because then nobody is going to, because they know already who's going to win. So you have to predict who is going to, and that prediction is not that easy, because you have to know which players are they buying and selling and blah, 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 all that. And the Germans, for some reason, they predict, they had with one of their Frankfurt, Eintracht Frankfurt it was called, that would be the top team the coming year. Well, that team, in that coming year, they fell out of the league. They went to the next division. That was a German forecasting. Okay, now I can tell you already, workforce or crew scheduling. We're going to talk a little bit about aviation scheduling. Aviation scheduling, all of you know that the airlines, by the way, for an airline to be competitive, just to give you an idea, I don't know how many planes Korea Airlines or Asiana Airlines, my guess, let me see how my estimates are, that the two of them together, Korea Airlines and Asiana, I would say 200 planes. Anybody who you have to challenge. Okay, I think it's 200 planes. 160? 160. 160. Oh, so my estimate's not that bad. Okay, but you know the big airlines, and big airlines could be the three American big ones. So that's Delta, United America. They have around 600 planes each. Then you have, you know, China Eastern. China Eastern is actually quite well managed. They are not stupid. That's also 600 planes you're talking about. And those planes have to be scheduled. You have to put in which routes, how you schedule the planes, etc., etc. And not only that you have to schedule the planes, by the way, if you can do a schedule in such a way that with the same routes, you can do it with one plane less. Suppose instead of 600, you can do it with 599 planes. A plane can be $100 million, so you free up $100 million. So a scale to have it and minimize the number of planes you use, that's actually quite important. So it's just to, anybody of you have heard of that company called Sabre Decision Technologies? Sabre was started as a subsidiary of American Airlines. And that was actually the person that was actually a CEO of American Airlines. His name was Crandall. He saw that for an airline to be competitive, they have to have good scheduling. Otherwise, they may as well get out of business. And he started this division in Sabre Decision Technology. It came up to 300 people. And then they spun it off as a separate, it's listed on the NASDAQ. The thing they do is scheduling planes. And by the way, besides scheduling planes, you have to schedule the crews. And by the way, the crews, you have all kinds of legal requirements of how many hours the crew can be in a plane. So for example, from Seoul to JFK, you need 2 crews in a plane because it's 14 hours. You cannot do that with 1 crew. So there are all kinds of rules that you have that, not only the number of consecutive hours that a pilot can fly, and the number of total hours per month or per week. Those rules you have to. So you can imagine there are many people working on this. There are many people working on this, and those people are not complete idiots. They are really smart people. There is a Georgia Tech, they have a whole bunch of people working on that. And they are making their money. They have very sophisticated software. You can imagine, of course, the interface between production and logistics, supply chain coordination. There is a lot of scheduling involved there. And that's a lot of academics, fortunately, because a lot of people can get tenure that way. Okay, so we are going to focus in this talk mainly on machine scheduling. Later on, if you have questions about the other ones, I can tell you, and I can tell you also who you could contact. All of these topics are actually fascinating. And not only that, all of these topics, the most research that has been done on it is deterministic optimization research. People have not done very much stochastic work on it. The stochastic side is still fairly open. And by the way, if you start working on, I guarantee you, if you start working on scheduling in airlines, and you knock on Korea Airlines' door, they for sure will open the door and talk to you. I can guarantee you. It is, I'm pretty sure that, maybe you know who works at Korea Airlines on scheduling, but I'm pretty sure they have smart people working. But very often you can come up with new ideas. Okay, what is the aim of the survey in European Journal of OR? Hopefully I don't know, actually it was for me also, even though all 4 people were reasonably experienced, it was a very interesting, because all of us, we thought differently from each other. Actually, I was more in the stochastic side and more in the application side, and the other 3 were more deterministic. And not only that, the writing styles of all 4 is completely different. And of course, every one of the 4 thinks that his own writing style is the best, of course. So you can imagine already what you have to, but no, we are still, that's very surprising. We are still very close friends. Even though we disagree quite a bit, we are still very close friends. So the idea was, you get an updated overview of the main field. Researchers scheduling complement their knowledge on less usual scheduling fields, because scheduling has so many different subfields. Now you can find out, hey, listen, there is this whole, and you find out a fairly large pocket of people at some top university in Poland that do very, very sophisticated research. And it's actually quite interesting. By the way, in Poland, there is, the hotbed there is Poznan. So if you go to Poznan, you have to do scheduling. If you do anything else, they tell you to go to another city. That's, but so you need, they have also, they call it now, the title of their book, they have a book on scheduling. And every 4 or 5 years, the next edition comes out. And the next edition of the Polish book, the first author is always Blazewicz. He's a very nice guy, Blazewicz. Every 4 or 5 years, the next edition comes out. It's and one more author, and the title changes. That's always, I think it's now called Handbook, believe it or not, I think it's called Handbook for Scheduling. And now you're talking about English. I don't know what ChatGPT says about what the optimal name of the book is. Because should it be Handbook for Scheduling or Handbook of Scheduling? By the way, you can have lots of discussions by many people about very small words in the title of the book. And people can have big disagreements there. By the way, the Polish people I'm good friends with them. My writing style is different from theirs. I'm actually they are funny people. They have a very good sense of humor. They're writing, I should write. Okay. Practitioners and application-oriented researchers get an idea of how scheduling applies to their field of expertise. Let me tell you, for example, that I told you already, scheduling in healthcare, you actually have to go to the top hospitals in Seoul, where they do the most complicated surgeries. What is the reason for that? Because the most complicated surgeries are done in operating rooms that are the most expensive. There are certain operating rooms that, just like a semiconductor wafer fabs, that the air pressure in the room has to be less than outside, higher than outside. Yeah. In neurosurgery room, operating rooms, it's the same rules that you have in wafer fabrication. Okay, because you want, when you open, really very interesting. So now you have to optimize the use of those operating rooms and the surgeons. You can imagine how much productivity, because operating room, how much does the operating room cost per day? And how much does the surgeon cost per hour? Those are very interesting. That's actually one of, and then you have the operating room times, so the surgery times. I can tell you some research we did in open heart surgery. That was actually quite interesting because we got Korean data. You know what open heart surgery is? They even have to put in bypasses. I hope that nobody of you or your parents have, because it's a big operation. Usually the operation lasts around 5 hours. And we look at those surgeries, we looked at data comparing, we compared German data with Korean data. What is it? It was fascinating. And we got all kinds of very interesting comparison. One comparison is that, and that is, we came to the following conclusion. And so one comparison is that the success rate of, which one has a higher success rate? The Korean surgeons or the German surgeons?
I guess it's Korean.
What?
Korean?
Yeah, the Korean surgeons had a higher success rate. And now you're, of course, looking at what is the reason that the Koreans do better. And now you're looking at a lot of data. There is a very popular reason why Koreans do better. The popular reason, we don't think it's the main reason. The popular reason is that the finger dexterity of Koreans is probably the highest developed in the world. Because the Koreans eat with chopsticks already from when they are, and they eat with the most difficult chopsticks. Because the Chinese eat with the wooden chopsticks, it's very easy to eat with wooden chopsticks. So and the Japanese also. The Korean chopsticks are the most difficult ones. So they have the best finger dexterity of all people in the world. Okay, that's the popular. That's the popular argument, which, by the way, it could make some sense. Huh? I don't know how people measure finger dexterity, but you can imagine that finger dexterity for a surgeon it's important. You would like, if you're operated upon, that the surgeon has some finger dexterity. The main idea is, what do you think the main idea is, right? The success rate in Korea is higher than in Germany. Time?
Sure.
No. The main idea is that the Korean patients, the BMI index is much lower than the German BMI index. And so you know that what is the biggest, the surgeon has to go through all that, that's a lot of work and it has a lot of complication because the patient has to go longer on the heart-lung machine because the surgeon has to cut has more time that he needs cutting, longer in the heart-lung machines that increases the probability of stroke, etc., etc. So by the way, that is, people are watching that in surgery scheduling. Surgery, there is one guy at University of Pittsburgh, he didn't come to New York. There are some papers written on surgery scheduling, data papers. They are fascinating. They are really fascinating. Actually, not so much on Korean data. A lot on German data, a lot on American data. But you could, if you are interested in that topic, that's a topic that I can assure you that you have here a Ministry of Health, and I'm pretty sure that people are interested in work being done on that topic. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the contents of that survey. It has 7 sections, and the first section, we only developed notation, and some of you already know the notation of machine scheduling. It's actually a fairly classical notation that started already in the 1970s. Usually what we call a Dutch mafia, not completely Dutch mafia, because there were some Dutch professors, but there are also some Americans involved. One of the Americans was Eugene Lawler, who wrote a very nice book on network optimization. He was also involved, and they had a very, very nice notation. That was the notation. And usually it has, you have to describe the machine environment or the configuration of the machines. The configuration of the machines can be quite complicated. Then you have to describe the processing restrictions and constraints. Maybe there is batch scheduling, maybe there are due dates, or maybe there are deadlines, and you have to describe the objective function. By the way, in the beginning, of course, you only look at single objective. By the way, with single objectives, scaling problems can be already complicated. You're not yet talking about multi-objectives, just single objectives. So those are the classical deterministic scaling. And usually, the less classical deterministic scaling problem, what are those? Those are the scaling problem the multi-objective one. Now we are going to look at multiple objectives. By the way, there are different types of multi-objective problems. Each one, of course, they are harder than the single objective problem, but you have to analyze them because in practice, whenever you have a problem in practice, it's guaranteed that it's multi-objective. And then we have scaling with rejections, all that type of stuff. We have many different, less classical deterministic scaling problems. Then there is scaling with uncertainty. What is uncertainty? There is a whole, it mainly comes from the computer science researchers, and mainly European computer scientists. It's the area of online scaling. What is online scaling? Now you don't know who is coming, which jobs are coming in. You don't know how long they're going to take. You only know something of what already has happened in the past, but you don't know anything of what has happened in the future. And based on that very limited knowledge, you have to come up with rules that minimizes some objective function. Okay, that's called online scaling. And we're going to talk a little bit about the different forms of online scaling. By the way, it came mainly from computer science, because in computer science, very often you have a computer and the jobs are coming in, or you have some works, but you don't know which jobs are going to come in the next day. You have no clue about that. And not only that, if a job comes in, you have no clue about how long it's going to take. So you deal with a lot of uncertainty. This next section is a little bit different because actually you have a little bit more information when you talk about stochastic scaling. Stochastic scaling, so with online scaling, you have no knowledge at all about what's going to happen in the future. With stochastic scaling, you have some knowledge. You have it in the form of the distribution, okay? The distribution of the time it will take for the next job to come in. It may be exponentially distributed, or the distribution of the processing time, so you have some knowledge. You don't have the actual processing time, and you don't have the actual time, but at least you have some information, the distribution. And based on that distribution, the parameters of that distribution, because you know the mean of that distribution. Based on those means, you can come up with some rules that minimize some objective function in the expectation. That's called stochastic scaling. So there are, and this was in my first years in academia, this is what I was looking at. Then we have applications that we're going to talk about. I can tell you already there are three main forms of applications of scaling that you have to worry about. One of it is in manufacturing. You can imagine in manufacturing, there are lots of applications of scaling. In semiconductors, in steel, every manufacturing, there is scaling problems. Okay, and by the way, very interesting. And whenever you look at scaling in any type of industry, you will be able to find a survey paper of that scaling in that industry, and that survey paper has 200 different papers that it mentions. Any industry. Then you have the other application area is scaling in services. The services are like I told you about, healthcare, aviation, or transportation in general. By the way, transportation in general, probably you don't have it here that much, because in Holland and in Italy, one very popular, and lots of university professors work on that, it's train timetabling. By the way, in China also, many people work on train timetabling. And you can imagine what are the times that trains have to go, how often, etc., the frequency. So you can imagine in train timetabling, by the way, those problems are completely different from aviation scaling. So aviation scaling and train timetabling, usually it's different companies that consult for those different industries. And those companies do scaling, basically scaling. So for some reason, I have the impression that in Korea, the train timetabling problems are probably less difficult than those in Holland and Germany. But maybe you want to look at it and see what do the Koreans do in train timetabling. It could be interesting. It could be. The Dutch, I know some people that have worked their whole life on it, and they didn't want to retire. They want to continue working. So apparently it must have been very enjoyable. Okay, I didn't. Once in a while I read what they do. Okay, I didn't want to do it. But you can imagine the other. So scaling in service industries is very important. Healthcare, train timetabling, shipping schedules, and container scheduling. That is really that's another story. Huh? You know, there is a Korean container company. Huh? So the container companies, the biggest one is the Danes. You know, Maersk. Maersk is the biggest one. Well, and there is a Korean one. And what is the Korean one? Container shipping company. And how many ships do they have? Do you know? By the way, they have scheduling problems. Not only that, they have very complicated optimization problems because, you know, when you put a 20-foot container in a ship, you know, you have to, first of all, where are you going to unload it? So if it's being the first port, that you want to be it a little bit on top, not all the way at the bottom of the ship. Okay, but on the other hand, each container, you know the weight, and you need to know where the center of gravity of all the weights of the container. And then you have refrigerators, you have reefers, so that's containers that need refrigeration, so they need a power supply, so they have to be at a special part of the ship, etc., etc. You know, I'm pretty sure that a company here also spent some time scheduling. Okay, so the biggest area is information processing scheduling. On cloud computing and grid computing, there is, on the cloud, you have a whole bunch of processors available, a whole bunch of databases, peripherals, blah, 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 and the jobs come in, and very often it has to be distributed scheduling, so you have to take a job, you have to cut it into pieces. Certain pieces has to go to one process, other pieces to other, and then you have to put all the solutions together. You can imagine that with grid computing, there are lots of scheduling problems. That's a whole industry. So, and we're going to talk maybe 10 minutes of if by chance you're thinking about a PhD topic or whatever, what could be future PhD topics? Okay. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about the classical ones. That was the classical ones are basically in the history, it was from 1970s to the 1990s. We had this notation mainly started by the Dutch mafia, and so those are the people that were involved there. By the way, all the scheduling people became very big shots in their country. So the Dutch mafia was a guy called Lenstra. There are several Lenstras, brothers. And the Lenstra that did the most in scheduling, he became the head of in Amsterdam, they have a center for mathematics and computer science. By the way, that's a very highly rated center. He was the director of that center. He reported immediately to the Ministry of Education. So if you do scheduling research, you report to the Ministry of Education. That's one. Okay? That's that guy. The other guy, there is a guy in one of the very early survey papers, his name is Ron Graham. Ron Graham, he is in one paper that describes the 10 most important mathematicians of the United States in the 20th century. So the 10 most important mathematicians, Ron Graham was one of them. And he did the first concept of worst case analysis. And this guy, a very, very bright guy, he was the head of mathematics at Bell Labs. And he married a Chinese lady. Her name was Fan Chung. She was one of the top graph theorists in the world. Yeah, I wonder what you speak about in bed at night. It's, so maybe worst case analysis of graph theoretical problem could be. She also became, she is very famous. And so Ron Graham was one of the big five. Then you have a guy, maybe you know him, his name is Ralph Gomery. You know Gomery, of Gomery Cuts. And he became the head of research of IBM. And IBM was a strong company. Now it's not that strong anymore, but at that time he was the head of research. So if you do Sky, you become a head of research. By the way, I had because in my department, when I was chair in my department, he needed an office. So I gave him an office. I got good friends with him. That's Ralph Gomery. So one day, I had to go for lunch with him. He's older than I am. So one day we go for lunch together. And I was with, he's a very, very nice guy. Yeah? Also, his second wife is also Chinese. It's really, you would be surprised. But his first wife passed away, and the second wife was a researcher at IBM Research. They got married, very happy. And I go for lunch with him, and then it starts raining, and so we have to run back. And I feel because we didn't have an umbrella with us. So we have to run back, so I run back. This was maybe 10 years ago. 10 years ago, so I can tell you I was then 65, and he was older than me. But I thought, he's 80, can he run? At 80, can he run? It's not completely clear to me if he can run. But okay, so then I said, okay, but not me, a little bit. So we get back, we didn't get too wet. So I tell our secretary, boy, I feel bad. This guy is 80 years old, and I made him run back because we didn't have an umbrella after lunch. And then my secretary tells me, yeah, there is only one slight mistake he made, because I knew that he had his birthday 1 week. That was one of the reasons I took him out for dinner, a week before we went for lunch. And my secretary, yeah, but you made one minor mistake. His birthday last week was not his 80th birthday, it was his 90th birthday. So can you imagine how? The secretaries always said they love to tell me what I do wrong. Okay, but so there are many people famous people that worked in this type of problems. They developed a notation, and believe it or not, when you have a one, you're talking about a single machine. That's fairly straightforward. This is a single machine. When you have a number of machines in parallel, you write a P for parallel machines. And if you have a flow shop, one machine feeding another machine, that we call it an F. And we have a certain, and then we have a single criterion, deterministic, single objective function. What was the main focus in those years? A complexity characterization. So we want to know which problems can be solved in polynomial time, which problems are weakly NP-hard, and which problems are strongly NP-hard. So, and by the way, that was a whole industry, very nice, because a lot of people can get tenure. And it's a sort of moment a little bit boring, because you said you have another complexity result. So now you get, instead of exact algorithms, you get approximation algorithms, etc., etc. Here, this is actually of my last edition of my schedule. This is actually more up to date than the last edition. This is actually of a draft of, just to tell you a little bit, these are all examples of polynomial time problems. So those are easy problems. So there are many problems in practice that are easy, and many of those problems, they sound a little bit abstract now because you may not be used to the notation. They look a little bit abstract, but each one of those problems is actually, for sure, because they are polynomial time solvable, it's an environment that you can imagine in practice, that you have seen in practice. And some of them, for example, that first one here is actually a special case of the traveling salesman problem. And by the way, that special case of the traveling salesman problem, which is polynomial time, because it's a special, you all know, of course, that the traveling salesman problem is strongly NP-hard. This is what we call the Gilmore-Gomery. The Gomery of Gomery-Katz, the head of research of IBM, so he was interested in traveling salesmen. So that was the traveling salesman problem. So here we have, for example, this is a job shop with two machines and you want to minimize the make span. That was a classical problem. You could also solve that in polynomial time. Then we look in the complexity hierarchy. Nowadays, they have made the complexity hierarchy much more sophisticated. But this was the original one. The original complexity hierarchy is we have polynomial time. We have weakly NP-hard. Weakly NP-hard usually comes from a reduction of a combinatorial problem we call partition. Okay, and we can find a pseudo-polynomial time algorithm. That's what weakly NP-hard. So it's not really that hard, but it's not polynomial time. Okay, these are a bunch of examples of weakly NP-hard problems. Let me give you two examples of weakly NP-hard problems that are very famous problems that you have heard about. One is called the knapsack problem. What is the knapsack problem? You have a knapsack of a fixed size, and you have to decide, and you have a bunch of items that you want to take on a trip. And each item, you know how much space it will take in your knapsack and how much utility you get from that item. And you want to fill the knapsack with those items and maximize your utility that you get of the items that you put in the knapsack. So they're very standard, very classical problem, and many people have, and you see it a lot in practice. Knapsack problems occur everywhere. Okay, that is a classical example of a weakly NP-hard problem. So let me give you another classical example of a weakly NP-hard problem, and that is here. We have two machines in parallel. We have a bunch of jobs. We want to assign some of the jobs to one of the machines and the remaining jobs on the other machine and finish them all as quickly as possible. Okay? It's minimizing the make span. We say that in the scheduling theory, minimizing the make span on two machines in parallel. By the way, that is a number theory, a classical problem in number. It's called the subset sum problem. So there are many number theorists, so pure mathematicians, that look at that problem. They call it the subset sum problem. And the computer scientists would call it the partition problem, because you have to have a set of jobs. You have to partition it in two subsets. One subset goes on one machine. No, it's a classical problem. Okay? It's called, okay, partition, subset sum, blah, 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 blah. That's also weakly weakly NP-hard. Weakly NP-hard, so we have a pseudo-polynomial time algorithm. Let me give you here some strongly NP-hard problems. Some strongly NP-hard problems. Well, this one here, the single machine, and you have what we call here sequence-dependent setup times. And you want to minimize the make span. That's basically a traveling salesman problem. And an arbitrary traveling salesman problem is strongly NP-hard. You remember the Gilmore-Montgomery special case was polynomial time, but the arbitrary one is strongly NP-hard. And here you have a whole bunch of problems that are strongly NP-hard. Nowadays, actually, there is what we call the scheduling zoo. So you can go online, and there is a scheduling zoo that says, hey, listen, you want to know of any problem, and you know the notation of how you describe a problem, you go on and you specify which problem you look at, then they will tell you what the research status of that problem is. By the way, there's still many open problems. There's still many open problems, and you can imagine already what are the most difficult open problems. The most difficult problems, suppose if you look at the borderline, the boundary between polynomial time and NP-hard, if a problem is very close to that borderline, but you don't know yet on which side of the borderline it is, but you know it's close to the borderline. If it turns out to be polynomial time, then you know that that polynomial time algorithm is not going to be a picnic. It will be order n to the 12th or something like that. There is actually a Frenchman, Baptiste, Le Pape, I think it's Baptiste, that they were very good in finding polynomial time algorithms for problems that are very close to being NP-hard. So those polynomial time algorithms are very complicated. They are polynomial, but they are order n to the 12th. So basically, they are a disaster to program. Okay, if they are on the other side of the boundary, you need a complexity proof for that. And if they are close to the borderline, then you know that the complexity proof will be very hard because it's so close to the borderline. So the closer the problem is to the boundary, on either side, the problem is a very hard problem. And by the way, there are many problems still that are very close to the boundaries of complexity hierarchy, very close, and they haven't solved yet which side of the boundary they are, because they are so close that the problem is pretty hard. But if you want to check, so here is the people that have worked on the scheduling zoo. This is a guy, I give you the PowerPoint, if you don't have to this is a guy, Brooker, a very, very nice guy. He was in an accident. You know, in Germany, they have something funny that in Germany, they think that in the German constitution, it says specifically that you're allowed to go on the highways 200 miles per hour, at least. That's part of the constitutional freedoms of the German. You know, when you see, that's also when you see the German cars. There was one of the Swiss schedulers, he bought a Honda. And Honda has a car that it's rated that it can go 235 kilometers per hour. Now, if you're a German and you buy such a car, and the manufacturer says it can go 235 kilometers, you have to check if the manufacturer really, is telling the truth. So, by the way, these are university professors that do that. Okay. And this guy, this is a Swiss guy, he checks, and the car, apparently they advertised it can go to 235, and he cannot get it go faster than 230. So he wrote a letter to the company. You know, with some Europeans, very interesting people. Okay, but by the way, there's some interesting. All of you know this girl here, this lady. She's very nice lady. If you have a chance, her name is Sigrid Knust. She gave a talk at the global scheduling seminar. I knew her reasonably well. And she gives a talk in the global scheduling seminar. Maybe some of you have attended her talk. And you see she is in her office there. And you see behind her, she has a big cello. And she, what? I don't have a big cello in my office. But she has a big cello. So what do you do with that cello? So in between complexity proofs, she has to practice because she works for the Osnabrück Symphony. So really, some people are really, I was really very impressed. And I say, okay, I still can work on the next edition of a scheduling book because I have the time. I tell her, I don't play the cello for the New York Symphony. I'm just writing a scheduling book. It's much easier. Okay, these are, I think that this guy has decided, some people at a certain moment decide that they are going to make money. Because in France, apparently as a professor, you don't make much money. This is a Dutchman. Now this whole system is managed out of Chile. In Chile, it's actually a very surprising place. The people are very, they can do impressive research. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about a less classical deterministic models. Well, we've talked already a little bit about multi-criteria scaling. I told you already it's the French school. There is actually a little bit, the French school, they have that book, and that book needs a third edition. So it is below and Kent. And there is that lady in Zhengzhou. That lady is really impressive lady. And then we have, well, you have here, let me tell you, well, let's not go through all these. You can read this on your own, but you can know that all these have very, very interesting applications. But now, let's mention this one here, that time-aware scaling. It's also called energy-aware scaling, which is also called, once in a while called time-dependent scaling. There is a book on time-dependent scaling. Why is that important, time-dependent scaling? You now know that the biggest consumption of electricity is those server farms, or they have all those processes. They have to accommodate all those web searches that if you go on Bing or, okay, and they consume electricity. And now you also know that electricity, also here in Korea for sure, electricity per kilowatt at 2 o'clock in the morning has a different price than at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So you know sort of the cost of the, and now you have to, and for sure with people that use ChatGPT, and I suspect that with ChatGPT, I wonder who is going to pay for the usage in the future. That payment of ChatGPT is going to be interesting. Well, already people know they have to have. Now, how are you going to do scaling of the jobs that come in, searches that have to be made at certain times of day, and it may be that in the future they tell you if you want to answer right now, you have to pay such and such. If you can wait 4 or 5 hours till after 12 o'clock midnight, it will be cheaper. It could be that because there is a huge price. So what do we want? We want to minimize our electricity consumption, or we want to optimize it somewhere. It will be some trade-offs that have to be made. There is already a big literature on time-aware energy-aware scheduling, and that big literature is in the computer science field. And again, okay, of all these areas, it is complexity characterization, how complex are they, etc., and what are the approximation algorithms. Okay, let me show you of multi-criteria scheduling, and this is just very simple multi-criteria scheduling. 2 objectives. This is actually an up-to-date version of tables that have appeared in the book of below on multi-criteria. He has these tables, but those tables of his are already 15 years old, and I had to put in a whole bunch of new results that the people in Zhengzhou have found, that lady Wu Bing Chen. So here is let's look at something we call hierarchical scaling. She's a little bit bored. Don't worry, I'm not offended. She's a PhD student or faculty? Master student? Okay, well, it's still all right that she. Okay, this is called hierarchical scaling. What is hierarchical scaling? Hierarchical scaling is the following. You have two objective functions, and one you think is more important than the other. So you solve, and you try to look for all, let's say you have two objective functions, say gamma 1 and gamma 2. Gamma 1 is more important. So you find all schedules, so you characterize all schedules that minimize gamma 1. Okay? You characterize those. So you find all schedules, and when you have all those schedules, within that class of schedules, you find the schedule that minimizes gamma 2. That's called hierarchical scaling. So you can imagine already it's not that difficult, and there are actually some very interesting, by the way, there are hundreds of papers written on this topic. Oh, there is a book written already that's already has gone in the second edition. Now here you can see actually if this one here is the sum of the completion times, so this is for a setting, a single machine. We have n jobs and we have the two objectives. This is the most simple setting in the scaling literature. And now you can see, hey, listen, so here we have the gamma 1s. These are the objective functions, this is the maximum lateness, the total weighted completion times, etc., etc. These are the gamma 2s. And then based on that, we can say, hey, listen, which one of these problems are polynomial, which one are strongly NP-hard, and which one are weakly NP-hard. Well, whenever you see here polynomial, this is of course polynomial, this is strongly NP-hard, okay, and this is weakly NP-hard. So some of them we really exactly know what the status is. And then you see a lot of them, you see the open there. What is open? We know it's NP-hard, but we don't know if it's strongly or weakly. And by the way, people have, they are working on it. And they're really, it has people's attention. So this is the status quo of a very simplistic environment. Single machine and two objectives, hierarchical. And we see here, some of them are, you see here some polynomial type problems, but you can see already it's a little bit more difficult. Let's look at another form of multi-objective scaling. Now we have a weighted combination. We want to minimize a weighted sum of the two objective functions. So we have again those two objective functions, but now we have a weighted sum of them. So the weight theta 1 times the value of one objective function plus theta 2 times the value of the other objective function. Okay, and we want to make, you can see already that this is, of course, so this is a parametric analysis now. Now you want to know the trade-off. And you know also that a hierarchical scaling, because now we want sort of a trade-off curve between the two objective functions. And the first one, the hierarchical scaling, was the endpoints of the trade-off curve. Huh? So that was hierarchical scaling. So that was a special case of this parametric. So now here you can see already, it's a lot more difficult. We have only a very few polynomial time. And you can see here again, strongly NP-hard, weakly NP-hard. By the way, there are open problems. This one here, we know it's NP-hard, but we don't know if it's strongly or weakly. So, and people are still worrying about it. So you can see there are fairly much open problems there that people can look at. It can keep some PhD students busy. Okay, let's talk a little bit. How many minutes do I have? You know, by chance?
Actually, I planned 1 hour, but you passed.
Okay, I go for another 10 minutes and then. Okay. Oh, that's right. She left. Go left. Okay. There are a couple of settings of online models. I told you already, online over list and online over time. Okay, online over list is the following. We have the jobs, actually, you have a stack of cards, and they represent jobs, and you have the stack of cards already in your hand. you don't actually know how many cards you have. You have them in your hand, and each card represents a job. And you open a card, you see what job it is, and you have to scale it. You have to put it on a machine. And after you have scaled it, you have to, if there is a next card, you open that card, you check it, and put it, okay, that's called online over list. And there are some actually very classical results, actually by this guy, Ron Graham, that I told you before, the guy that was married with the Chinese lady, Fan Chung. She was not from Maine, she was from Taiwan. Some people want to be explicit about it, because there seems to be a difference. Ron Graham was an expert in this type of thing. Now you have online over time, so these jobs of online over list are all available at time t is 0. The only thing is that you don't know in advance how many are available, so you have to decide at a certain moment. It's actually very closely related to a problem that they call the secondary problem. Most of you know the secondary problem. You know what the secondary problem is. HR has to decide, hey, listen, we have a position open, we have to hire, and now we are going to look at applicants that come in. Should we hire or should we not hire? But we don't know if there are other applicants coming in, and you have to make a decision. This is a little bit online over list. Online over time, the jobs arrive now at unpredictable times, but you don't know if they are going to arrive. Maybe some of them will arrive. You don't know how much time they will need, how much processing they need. Okay, that's called. By the way, there is now an extension. Well, there is here same online over list. And there's also something called stochastic online scaling. What is stochastic online scaling? Or is stochastic online over time, which is actually, there are a couple of Dutchmen that work in there. And they say now, you don't know if the jobs are coming, but if they're coming, in the past we didn't know what their processing time is. If they come now, we know what the distribution of their processing time is, but we don't know their actual processing time. This is called stochastic online scaling, which is a little bit different from stochastic scaling, because stochastic scaling, you know the distributional assumptions of the arrival process. With stochastic online scaling, you don't know what the arrivals will be. But at least if a job comes, you know the distribution. And there are some people, and actually fairly nice results that have appeared in Matopower. Okay? And always you're interested in what we call competitive ratios of simple algorithms. So you have a simple algorithm according to which you scale. What is a competitive ratio? You're going to say the worst case of using your algorithm compared to if you would have known all the precise information and you would have used the best possible algorithm. That's a competitive ratio. So you're interested in these type of things. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about robust model. Well, there is sort of, because I want to talk about something specific. So if we have, and let's you can read this on your own. The Kambok will give you the PowerPoint, and you can read it, and you can read the paper if you have nothing better to do. Let me show you actually, because there it is. Okay, this is stochastic models. I'm not going to get into that, but if you're by chance interested in it, by the way, there is a book written on stochastic scaling. And that book is written by 3 Chinese in Hong Kong and in Australia. The only thing is they do a lot of stochastic scaling, only single machine and parallel machines. They don't look at flow charts, but you can the first author, I can tell you, Xiaochang Cai. Cai is spelled C-A-I. Okay, we are not going to get into it. Maybe I can, if you are really interested, I can. Because actually this field I know very, very well. I want to, there is something that I want to tell you about stochastic models. That whenever you have a deterministic model that is NP hard, so you have a nice classical deterministic model, knapsack or subset sum, that is NP hard, and now I stochasticize it. So for the deterministic model, I don't have a nice algorithm. I can come up with some approximation algorithm, blah, 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 blah. But there is no nice algorithm. It's NP hard. Now I stochasticize the model. And that tells me that, hey, listen, the processing times are not anymore deterministic. They are a random variable with a specific distribution. For example, the exponential distribution. I stochasticize the problem, and I want now the optimal policy that minimizes the expectation. You follow what I say by chance? Okay. Now the deterministic problem is NP hard. For the stochastic version of that problem, a very nice optimal policy. The optimal policy, usually a monotone policy is optimal, perfectly optimal, with a very nice, elegant proof. So whenever you have a deterministic problem, it's very, very hard to get an optimal solution because it will take you time. There's maybe you have a pseudo-polynomial type algorithm, but it's not a nice rule, not a simple rule, not a simple priority rule. It's a fairly complicated algorithm. And you stochasticize the problem, and you want to minimize the objective function and expectation. Now, a very simple monotone rule, like for example, monotone rule is longest expected processing time first. A very simple monotone rule minimizes the problem in expectation. It is optimal, not approximation or anything, it is optimal. Okay, that is something that people found, actually in the early 80s, that, hey, listen, a deterministic problem apparently is harder to solve than a stochastic problem. Because the stochastic problem, hey, listen, a simple rule and you're minimizing it and expectation. You can go home. You don't have to worry anymore. A deterministic problem, you have to worry because you cannot, it takes a lot of work to find the optimal solution. Now that is intuitive. Why is it intuitive? That it is for the deterministic problem much harder to get to the optimal solution than for the stochastic problem to get an optimal solution. Why? Because in the deterministic problem, basically you have too much information. You have very precise information, and you want to maximize the utility of that information. So you want to take advantage of all the information in the deterministic problem, and taking advantage of all the information in the deterministic problem will take you a lot of time. In a stochastic problem, all the data is a little bit fuzzy. So you don't have much information. And because you have much less information, a very simple rule will turn out to be optimal in expectation. So it is a little bit intuitive that the stochastic version has a very nice monotone optimal policy that minimizes the objective function and expectation. And the deterministic problem that is weakly NP hard or strongly NP hard. Okay? So that's actually one of the important parts of stochastic scaling. The stochastic scaling, even though for the deterministic counterparts you cannot find easily an optimal solution, for the stochastic version, we have a very nice optimal. Okay? That's the only thing. Let me try to show 5 more minutes. You can look at those. Okay. I want to talk about the fixed parameter tractability. Because there are a lot of open problems, and the problems in this field tend to be doable. They are not very, very, very difficult. Okay, so you don't have to compete with, let's say, that lady in Zhengzhou. Here you have to compete against easier people. Okay, what is the, let me tell you one, all of you know what integer programming is. Okay, you know that integer programming is strongly NP hard. Now you know that integer programming has 2 parameters, the number of variables and the number of constraints. So the number of variables tells you the A matrix is, if the number of variables is very, very large, the A matrix is sort of very wide, and the number of constraints tell you how deep the A matrix is. Now we know that if you increase the size of the problem, the computation time is going to grow exponentially. Okay? That's it. Now, this is what this one Dutchman, Hendrik Lenstra, he was a professor in mathematics at Berkeley. By the way, that guy is smart. He thought this was just a cute little thing that he did. It was published in Math of War. Well, very often you are in combinatorial theory in general, when you have a strongly NP-hard problem, there are a number of different parameters. And some parameter may make the problem hard, and the other one will not make it hard. So if you have the two parameters, the number of constraints and the number of variables, which one causes the problem to be hard? And the mixed integer programming is strongly NP-hard. Is it the number of variables or the number of constraints? Which one makes the problem hard?
Variables.
The number of variables makes it hard. The number of constraints, if you make the problem size larger by increasing the number of constraints, the computation time is not growing exponentially. It actually grows only polynomially. But if you increase the size of problems by increasing the number of variables, now the computation time increases exponentially. So we find out that among the two parameters, one of them makes a problem hard, but the other one doesn't make it hard. You follow this by chance? Okay, now with many scheduling problems, you have a whole bunch of different parameters. You have the processing times, you have the weights, you have the due dates, blah, 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 blah. Now you say, hey, listen, suppose I fix them, and you say the problem is strongly NP-hard. Now I tell you, okay, I fix the number of weights. So if I increase the problem size, I only have 3 different weights. Let's say a job is a normal job, a rush jobs, or a very urgent job. But I don't increase the number of different weights. I keep that constant. It could be that the problem is strongly NP-hard, but I put an upper bound on the number of different values that parameter can take. You follow by chance what I say? Okay. Now it turns out that the problem, if I put an upper bound on the number of values of that parameter, now, and I increase the size of the problem by increasing the other data, it may be that the total computation time does not go up exponentially, but polynomially. So if I fix that parameter, the number of weights, I say there are now only 3 weights. It turns out the problem may be polynomial. Okay? So I would like to know of each scheduling problem, if I fix a certain parameter, I fix the number of different values that parameter can take, does the problem become polynomial? Because I want to know which parameter makes that problem hard. We know it's hard, but which parameter makes it? Okay, let me give you. So this is called fixed parameter tractability. The first result was by this guy, Lenstra. That's a paper in Math of War in the 1980s, and most people didn't even pay attention to it. Okay? So now let me look at okay, let me give you here. So you have to, there is a whole notation for fixed parameter tractability. Let me tell you a couple of examples of which parameter we can put an upper bound on, and the problem goes from strongly NP-hard to polynomial time. For example, here, parallel machines CMax, minimizing CMax time, we know it's weakly NP-hard. If we fix the number of different processing times, so we say, hey, listen, we are going to look, we increase the number of jobs, but the number of different processing time is maybe only 12 different processing times. So I fixed the number of different processing times. Okay? This problem turns out to be polynomial time by fixing the number of different processing times. Let me tell you some other one here. You have a single machine. There is actually this, the people that work in this field here, they're actually very interesting people. One interesting person is a PhD student that I had in Israel that got his PhD 2 years ago. There is these results here are, we worked on the knapsack problem. Okay. And after he got the paper appeared in Annals of OR, let me tell you what PhD students can do after they finish their PhD. So he finished his PhD. Some papers were actually very nicely written. He went into politics. So first he became a member of parliament in Israel. That's already something, because a member of parliament in Korea is big deal, isn't it? A fairly big deal. And he was maybe 1 year member of parliament. Netanyahu made him a minister of his cabinet. So he is a minister of his cabinet. Let me tell you now, the Israelis right now, if you're a minister in Netanyahu's cabinet, you don't have time for research. His name is Shlomo Karhi, very interesting guy. Not only a very interesting guy, he has a sense of humor and all that. And he comes from a family, a fairly religious Jewish family. And his mother had 17 kids. 17 kids, he was the oldest one. 17 kids, he was the oldest one. He himself, because he is very, very busy, the whole cabinet is continuously busy there. He himself has only 7 kids, and he apologizes. Only 7 kids, because he says he is hardly ever home. But that's a person, his name is Karhi, K-A-R-H-I. And there is a very interesting paper written, and he actually worked on this problem here. And by the way, the complexity theory of fixed parameter intractability, just to tell you a little bit, these are some of the results. There are very few fixed parameter intractability, so you got sort of the idea what it is. It started out in graph theory. And in graph theory, there's already a book written on it, on fixed parameter intractability and graph theory. And there are people there that are, in graph theory, they're very smart people. In scaling, there are a couple of Germans, this Israeli guy who stopped working on it, and a couple of Germans, and some guys also in Russia, you know, Novosibirsk, that's in the middle of Siberia. They have nothing better to do, they work on this. Okay. I can tell you that I have lots of conjectures of fixed parameter, especially when with batch size problems. If you fix the number of batches or something like that, then strongly NP-hard problems can become polynomial time. Okay, let me check if I would talk about anything else, because when did you want me to finish? Okay, this is fixed parameter intractability. Applications, okay. Hold on, wait a second. Fixed parameter. Well, there is a little bit, well, of course, well, no, there is one thing here. Okay, machine learning and reinforcement learning, you know, everybody and his mother is looking at it. Okay? And that, you have to read on it, because it's probably interesting. Let me tell you something else. This is not a very, very good clicker. In this here, fairness in scaling. Fairness in scaling is going to be a big deal. Either way, fairness in scaling is going to be, how do you define fairness? And we were talking about scaling in healthcare, surgery scaling and all that. Fairness is going to play a big role. That's how do you define it and how do you put that in the objective function. That is, if you're looking for a thesis topic, it's not a bad thesis topic. Okay, let's stop here, unless you want me to continue.